Good morning, everyone. Craig here with Integrated Physical Therapy. Today I want to discuss the concept of squats. Been a lot of controversy about squats. Are they good for you? Are they not good for you? Are they going to damage your knees? They're not going to damage your knees. In my personal opinion, I think squats are one of the best exercises we can ever do. Every time we stand up and sit down from a chair, every time we stand up and sit down from on a toilet and get up from that toilet, every time we sit down on the couch and get up from that couch, these are squats. And in order to do a proper squat, we need a lot of motion in multiple joints. So we're talking about stability in the feet and ankles, lower extremity, hips, and pelvis. We're also talking about mobility of the feet and ankles and knees and hips and pelvis and thoracic spine as well. So the proper squat technique is something that I want to go through a little bit today and go through various different parts and pieces of it, and then we'll take it even further than that and break it down into its individual joints. So please join us on this journey. Squat techniques, what is good, what is not good. The other thing that I think is extremely important to understand is no two squats are the same, no two people are the same, no two anatomies are the same. So what works for you might not work for me, and what might work for me might not work for you. But we're going to have a basic concept in mind about how to create mobility through multiple joints while maintaining stability through the entire body. Follow me on this journey. Let's go. So we're back talking about the squat once again. And I've taken off my socks and shoes so we can talk about the setup. The setup is probably the most important part of the squat, not the bottom end position. Everybody's going to have a little bit of a slightly different position based on the availability in the range of motion that you might have in your joints. So the less range of motion you have in your ankles, the more turned out you might be. The more you might be up on your toes and lifting your heels a little bit. When we talk about perfection, which as we all know doesn't exactly exist, we're looking between a 5 and a 7 degree turnout. Sometimes a coach might set you up slightly more into about a 25 to 30 degree turnout, which is not a bad idea, because what that does is it opens up the hips a little bit, giving you a little bit more range of motion when you move forward. So take a minute to check out your setup. If you can move well in a 5 to 7 degree, fantastic. If not, and we need to turn it out a little bit while working on that mobility issues in the ankles and the feet and the knees and the hips, we can do that as we progress into our squat techniques. But take a look at the setup. Start with the feet. We'll start there. We'll move on to part 2 in just a moment. So something that I always like to talk about when we first move in our squat, after we've completed a good assessment of our setup, is what's the first thing to move? Is it the knees bending? Is it the tush that goes back? Well, in my opinion, it's the tush that goes back. Now we need to keep our neck and our spine in neutral as our tush moves in the backwards direction. And a nice little easy tip that we can do in that process is lifting our arms as that happens. So I've got my feet set up. I'm at a nice comfortable, about 10 degree external rotation of my hips. That's comfortable for me. And as I move my tush back, my arms are going to come up. Notice that my knees stay neutral and my base of support stays right over the middle of my foot. It's going to look just like that. The next thing I want to talk about is making sure that we have our hips really engaged through this process. And one of the cues that I like to give people is in your foot position, remember making sure that our entire foot is in connection with the floor. If we push the floor apart from our feet, now we're not compromising our feet by rolling over, we're still maintaining good connection with our feet. And as our tush moves back, right, and our spine stays in its proper integrity, we push the floor apart, and what will happen is you'll get some really good activation of these external rotators of the hip, specifically that glute medius in there. And this is another absolute that takes place within a squat. So as we move into our descension into the lower parts of the squat, we want to maintain activity. We want to be in active movement. It's not just a drop down into it. Okay, so we want to make sure that our feet are in good position, our setup is solid. We want to make sure that our hip hinge, meaning our tush goes back, make sure that we have our external rotation or the torque that's being created in our pushing the floor apart while maintaining good connection with our feet. At the same time, the postural integrity of the squat is maintained throughout. What I mean by that is that our neck stays in neutral, our spine stays nice and straight, our hips are engaged all the way down into our feet of the squat. All right, we're going to start into our descent in just a few moments. Give yourself a little bit of time just practicing the beginning of the squat. We need to learn from the start, otherwise that's going to lead to compensation. It's going to lead to some poor format that might actually lead to much more issues further down the road. We want to make sure we're starting correct. Try this out. We'll start in the descent in just a minute. Now, once you've got a solid setup and you're ready to start the movement, it's important to maintain balance and stability throughout your movement. That's the most important part here, balance and stability. The next part is do not exceed what your range of motion allows for. In other words, don't compensate. If you can't go all the way down, don't go all the way down. If you can do 40 degrees, great. If you can do 60 degrees, great. Today we're gonna go to about 90 degrees and we're gonna stop right there. I've got a bench here that is almost equivalent to my 90 degrees, and that's where we're gonna go just for today. So do what is comfortable for you. The whole idea of getting your tush all the way down to the ground is wonderful if you're an Olympic weightlifter, but for somebody like myself that does not do that movement, I'm gonna go as far as I can maintain stability along with the comfortable mobility that's allowed for me. So stability and balance are very important. So during our descent, we're gonna go as far as we need to go. I'm gonna line myself up, make sure that I've got my bench right behind me. And again, we're gonna maintain our feet as straight as possible. 5 to 7 degrees is good for me. And we're gonna try to keep the shins vertical. Try to keep the shins vertical up underneath you, okay? So we're gonna get to 90 degrees. Here we go. Setup is good. Arms out in front of us. And we're gonna move down into our descent. Remember, bringing our feet apart is gonna engage through my glute. I'm gonna hit my 90 degrees and I'm gonna come back up once again. I felt my weight a little too far forward on that one. So when I do on the next one, I'm gonna try to shift my weight a little further back over my feet, and then I'm gonna come further up. That felt a lot better on that second one. So the idea here again is go as far as you feel comfortable doing, maintaining good neutral neck and cervical spine. Make sure your spine is engaged, make sure your tush is back, pushing the floor apart. Want to make sure that the mobility, the stability equals balance throughout the movement. Now let's assume that we are just starting out learning how to squat. Let's assume that we may have a foot or an ankle restriction, and we need to work with that restriction to maintain balance and stability through this movement. So we can make modifications, we can make some adjustments. In this case, what I've done is I've taken a couple of small books and I've placed them down here. And what that's gonna do is when I put my heels on those books, it's gonna take away the amount of range required in my ankles, and it's gonna allow some greater depth into my squat in my hips. Now, it's a modification, which means that there does need to be some attention and some awareness around where the limitation in my foot and my ankle might be as we move forward into the squat. So I can use the modification to allow for the movement to be achieved. However, we don't want to lose sight that we do want to gain that range of motion and functionality back into our ankles. So just placing the heels on the book allows for more range in my ankle because I can keep my shins a little bit more vertical, my spine a little bit more in neutral as we come up. Okay, same rules apply. Good connection through our feet. Feet are maintained in neutral. We're pushing the floor apart as we come down. Postural integrity throughout. It just makes the range of motion a little bit more doable today. Maybe tomorrow what we'll do is we'll take a thinner book, a smaller lift, continue to work on the range of motion of the ankle. And that's going to be a video series coming up in a little bit. We're going to break down each mobility exercise per body part. So this is a nice easy modification if you're having difficulty with ankle range of motion and getting down into that squat. So once we've really achieved the ability to maintain good balance and stability on the way down, now we need to reverse that on the way up. And what we need to think about is how our posterior chain, the muscles along our back and the back of our legs and our tush and our glutes really become involved in this process. So as we're in our down position, right? We're here in our 90 degrees. Our chest is nice and level. It's not rounded, it's not extended, it's in a neutral position. Our neck is in a neutral position also. We need to think about, as we push the floor apart, that we drive from our hips in that upward direction and are pulling our shins back into that vertical position. On the top, I always like to instruct people to finish the squat, squeeze the butt on the top to make sure we finish opening up our hip flexors and engaging in our butt. So again, as we come down into our just 90 degrees, we pull and extend all the way through. Squat is such a quintessential exercise to what we do, and before it becomes an exercise, it has to be assessed as a movement. There are so many moving parts that take place in the squat, from the feet to the ankles, the knees, the hips, the spine, all the way through. And if one is limited in its range of motion, it's going to compensate to another body part and another joint. So this is a wonderful exercise that is first a movement. First do the assessment, find out where the limitations are, create modifications to allow the movement to be done successfully, continue to work on those range of motions so you can decrease the modifications and move into a functional squat. It's something we do every day, all day. Let's learn how to do it right.